Okay, so beginning Augustine's free choice of the will. You'll notice that this is written in a dialogue format. I know for some people that can be a little hard to follow, but in this dialogue, there's only two people, and there aren't really disagreements the way there sometimes are in philosophy that's written as a back and forth between two people. It's more just that Augustine wants to show you how you as a reader can be developing as you read this book. So Evodius, the name of the person whom Augustine is talking to in this book, that's the name of Augustine's son. And so that's sort of cute, you know. It's sort of like, oh, dad's writing a love letter to his son, right? He's saying, I think you're worth talking to about these issues. But also in the same way that Augustine knows some of these things and his son doesn't yet, and his son comes to understand them by the end of it, that's what Augustine wants you to feel like yourself. Not just that you're reading a book and trying to figure out what the author says, but that you yourself are developing and improving, not just in terms of what you know, but in terms of your moral certainty about what's good for you. So he wants you, like a child, to come to these ideas with a sense of curiosity and wonder, and then feel yourself getting stronger, basically. Feel yourself becoming more capable as you go through this dialogue, just as his son, grew up and became a man. So that's my literary spin on why it's a dialogue. Okay? So, the book starts out, we get right into it. Is God the cause of evil? So most of these headings for the chapters are pretty accurate. Is God the cause of evil? And what we see right away is a standard philosopher move. Evodius basically says, hey, Dad, why do bad things happen in the world? I believe in God, but I look around. The Roman soldiers go to war all the time. I see children die from starvation. I see people steal things. I see people cheat on their spouses. Wow. Why do bad things happen? That's the big question with which we start out this reading. Why do bad things happen? And then Augustine makes the standard philosopher move and says, we have to be specific about how we ask questions. We have to be precise. Remember, I always tell you to define your terms right away. And so Augustine, the trained philosopher, says, but aren't there two kinds of evil? And don't we have to treat and understand them differently? And Evodius goes, oh yeah, you're right. So the starting big question here is, why do bad things happen? And Augustine says, well, there's actually two kinds of bad things. There's bad things which you do, and then there's bad things that happen to you. There's doing evil and then suffering or undergoing evil. Now here's what Augustine says. This gets proved a little more later on. But he says, we should probably take it on faith for now, until we prove it later, that God is never the cause of bad things you do. Please note the title of the book is Free Choice of the Will. Bad things which you do are always a free choice that you made to do the bad thing. Okay. Now Augustine says, bad things that happen to you may be caused by God, but they will in fact not be unjust things, because God would never do anything unjust, but that somehow the bad things that happen to you will in fact be good in some way. So the point basically is this. You do something bad. You go out and you steal. That's bad as soon as you feel like stealing, as soon as that thought crosses your mind. Now, a second bad thing happens. When the person wakes up the next morning and realizes that you stole their bicycle, say, then something bad has happened to them. So you were bad when you wanted to steal their bike. Something bad happened to them as soon as they woke up and discovered their bike was gone. And then we might say another bad thing happens to the criminal. They get caught and go to jail, and they say, oh man, jail, wow, it sucks in here. Augustine would say the choice to steal the bike was completely up to the thief, not on God, not on other people. The person was not forced to do it. Now, the suffering of the other two, most obviously the suffering of the criminal, is not in fact a bad thing that God did to the criminal. It's actually a good thing, right? When criminals get punished for all sorts of reasons. They're less likely to commit crime in the future. They may repent in prison and decide to change their life. All these sort of things. So, sin is basically completely on the free choice of the individual. You can't say the alcohol made me do it, right? You can't say my friends, my peer pressure, they made me do it. And when something bad happens to you, often it's God's way of correcting or remedying something that's wrong with the universe. Okay? Now, not all that is fully proven yet. That's sort of half what Augustine said already in chapter 1, book 1, and it's half where we're going. Okay. So we see in chapter 2, the question gets a little sharper, it gets a little more refined. And Evodius says, okay, I see that there's doing bad and receiving bad, and that they're different. Now I want to know why we do bad things. And Augustine says, this is page 5, he says, basically he's like, I'm so glad you asked. Because this is a crucial question. Even if you're in general a good person, you're not perfect, right? Well, why not? Especially if you're a religious person and you think that God has some control over the world and that God is good, why the heck are some people so rotten? And let's do what Augustine wants us to do here. He wants you to focus on yourself. Not that you can feel guilty and beat up on yourself, but other people's evil, that's their own concern, right? In Christian terms, they have their own soul to save. You don't need to worry about trying to save their souls. You have to worry about your own soul. In more philosophical terms, we can say you only control your own free will or behavior. So while it's sad when other people act evilly, you can't control that. You can, however, control your own free will and decisions. So the question of why is there evil in the world? Why do people do evil? Augustine thinks, you know this expression, healer, heal thyself, like doctor, cure yourself. Okay, sinners, heal yourself. Flawed individual, figure out why you're flawed and make bad decisions first, because you can control that and fix it. Maybe later on worry about why other people are such jerks. So I just let that resonate for a second. Let it marinate, like I like to say. It's not that you're worse than other people. It's that you can, in fact, control your free will. And so you have total, Augustine would say, but I think we can all agree, you have some control over your behavior. And you have basically no control over other people's behavior. So if you want to remove evil or badness from the world, you are the primary site at which you can work on that. Don't try to fix other people first, try to fix yourself first. Actually, just pause the recording, just let that sink in for a second. So this is what Augustine says on page 5. On page 5 he says, this question deeply disturbed me in my youth. And this is actually true if you read Augustine's very beautiful book, Confessions is what it's called. Very beautiful book about his personal struggles and how he overcame them and became this world-famous person. Okay, it's a lovely book. It's a key part of Western civilization. You should read it. It's a lot more fun than this book too. Okay, we have reasons we're reading this book, but the Confessions is a beautiful, lovely book. Okay? And he says, yeah, like I said in my other book, go buy it. He said, yeah, I was disturbed by this question intensely when I was young. Why do I do bad things? Why do I keep being drawn to, he had sex outside of marriage, he liked to party, sort of, and show off how smart he was. He wasn't really Christian for a long, long time, and all these things he really regretted, right? So we can ask ourselves the same sort of question, okay? And it should disturb you. That's why I wanted us to pause and let it marinate a little while before. It should disturb you that you're not as good as you want to be. I don't think any of us are as good as we want to be, right? So how do we become that person? So here's the response. Like I've pointed out before, there's a very Christian way to take this, and there's a more philosophical way to take it as well. And he says, this question scared me when I was young, and I thought there's no way out of this question. I thought that the world was just evil for no comprehensible reason, that God might be to blame for that evil, and that there's no control over it. And he said, wow, that's a bleak life. But he says, this is my point. He said, my love for discovering the truth won me divine aid. That's what helped me rise up from my fall into this disturbing darkness. It helped me recover my breath so that I could keep pursuing truth. And he says, since my case was so zealously argued that I was acquitted in this trial, what he means is that he fought so hard to find the truth in the trial of his life, that he escaped the darkness of that question. So he says, quote, for God will aid us and will make us fully understand what we only sort of believe. Now, of course, you can see the Christian theme there. You can't do everything yourself. For some things, you have to rely on God. And there's a whole doctrine of original sin, that we're sinful by nature, that you are so sinful that you can't free yourself from the bondage of sin all by yourself. So you need God's help. God sent Jesus. There's a whole set of ideas that you can fill in there if you're familiar with them. Now, more philosophically, for those of you who aren't Christian or Christian but don't really pay attention to that sort of stuff, or aren't sure, here's the more philosophical approach to it. You are a rational animal. That means you can know things. You also have a free will, so you're in control of your choices. It's pretty great to be a human. But there are certain things that you cannot do on your own. Rome was not built by a single emperor. It was built by generations of Romans. As they say, Rome was not built in a day. It was also not built by a single person. Just think about something basic. You all can read. Nobody learns to read by themselves. Think about all the phones, PlayStations, books, magazines, whatever's in your house. You could have built some of that stuff by yourself, but if you get to be an expert enough that you could build a PlayStation by yourself, for instance, then you don't have the time, realistically, to also be an expert in TVs and build TVs by your own. Notice that Nintendo, for instance, makes game consoles. They don't also make TVs. So these aren't great metaphors, but the non-theological, non-Christian, that is the purely philosophical message here is this. There's some things you can do yourself. There's some things, on the other hand, which you need other people or something bigger than yourself in order to accomplish. Now, maybe some of you are thinking, no, if I had more time, if I didn't have to do homework, I could learn how to build PlayStations and TVs. Or you might be saying, well, some people could teach themselves to read on their own. I just didn't happen to have to do that myself. But think about this. If I tell you go to chapter 3 and count how many pages are in chapter 3, and you do that, you're able to do that because you're smart. But you rely on something else in order to count. You rely on something bigger than yourself, something which existed before you did and will exist after you're dead, and you rely on something that other people have access to as well. So it's not just about you, but about something that other people have as well. Literally, you couldn't count the pages in chapter 3 if it weren't for number and math. You didn't invent number and math yourself. You didn't learn number and math yourself. It's that it was already, the power to count was already in you from the day you were born. Other people can count the same pages as you, so clearly there's something that they can do, so it's not exclusively your own power. And the truth of number, it was true how many pages were in Augustine as soon as he wrote this book, before you were born. After you die, rest in peace. There will still be the same number of pages in the book. So all these things are external to you. That is, there are things which are bigger than you and more powerful than you that allow you to do the things you do. Human reason allows you to speak and think. Number allows you to count and make your way through the world. You didn't invent those tools. They were given to you. So to rephrase it as I said in the beginning, you can't do everything all on your own. You need external assistance for certain things. Okay. So moving forward to chapter 3. Okay. Now we return to the specifically ethical points again. This is what Augustine says there. He says, lust is the source of evil. When you do bad things, lust is the source of evil. How about this, though? The Latin word is libido, a word which you've probably heard before. We see that on page 8. If you would, please, in your notes, write that lust or libido in Augustine, it's probably better to think of the word desire there. Lust to me just sounds like pure physical desire for sex. That's what the word has come to mean in English. But what Augustine really means is desire, and I would write all these things down. He means desire in the sense of intention, right? So what you want to do. He means libido in the sense of what your will is directed towards, your free will, what it's choosing. And to me, at least, desire has this mental connotation that's in Augustine, whereas lust makes it sound like it's, what animals do when they're in heat, and that's not what he means here. So, this is what Augustine means by lust, by what I would call desire. Okay. And we return to page 7 for this. Augustine says, what makes something wrong? This is such a philosophy question, right? When we say there's something wrong, why is it wrong? What about it is wrong? What is the salient or relevant feature of the action that makes it wrong? Okay. For Augustine, let's be crystal clear about this. This is what he means by lust or desire. What makes something wrong is the desire to do wrong. So it's the inward desire that you have, not the physical act itself. Now, let me say that again. For Augustine, what makes something wrong is the desire or lust to do something wrong. It's the inner desire, not the outward external act. Now, hopefully what some of you just realized, you said, hey, you yell at me when I do this in my paper, professor, and now you've just done it. You define something circularly or through itself. Did you notice that the way I said it? I said something's bad when it's the desire to do something bad. That's like saying, well, how do I know if this car's red or pink? And you go, well, it's red if it's been painted red. And you go, true, but you've said nothing, right? So, once more, put this in the notes, but we're going to explain it in a few minutes. The desire to do something bad for Augustine is the deliberate desire, the knowing desire to choose what's lower rather than what's higher. Sin or lust or evil desire is when you knowingly choose the lesser or lower thing rather than the higher or better thing. So let's give the example that Augustine gives in chapter 3. It's mainly on page 7. So he says, okay, how do we find when something's bad? And Augustine says, well, how about adultery? Adultery is bad, right? Why is that? Okay. Sorry, let's back up a little bit. Once more, this is very philosophy here, how this works. Augustine says, you're asking why we do evil. What we want is a pure definition of what evil or wrongdoing is. And I just gave you that. I jumped ahead. And he says, but it's really hard to come right out of the gate and give a pure definition of what evil or wrongdoing is. Easier, although not as philosophical, is to give a list of things which count as evil. Okay, so what we want as philosophers is we want the general definition of what something is. What is wrongdoing? But that's really hard to generate. So a little trick that philosophy has come up with, and you can use this in your own day-to-day life, believe me, is when you're not sure what really makes something wrong, if you're not sure what really makes something count as a certain thing or not. Okay? Give examples of things you know for sure are that way, and then try to figure out what in those things is shared among all of them. Right? So what you want is a universal, general, what sometimes people call an abstract definition. Lust is a desire for the lower rather than the higher. But those are hard to come up with from the start. So what we'll do instead is say, give me some examples of things you know are evil, and then we'll poke and we'll prod them and we'll try to investigate and see why they might be evil. Maybe then we can trace our way backwards to the original definition. Okay? So Evodius goes, oh, I can do this because it's something that non-philosophers are good at. Give me examples of things that are bad. And he says, adultery, homicide. And then Augustine says, okay, try now to say why adultery is evil. And Augustine says, please pay attention to this. He says, is it wrong because the law forbids it? Is murder wrong because the law forbids it? And Evodius is smart and he says, no. Murder is not wrong because the law forbids it. It's the other way around. Murder is against the law because it's morally wrong. So I'll say that again. Murder, he actually says adultery, but adultery is not really illegal anymore, so we'll go with murder. Okay? Murder is illegal and it's immoral. But it's a one-way street here. It is made illegal because it's already immoral. So you can't figure out why bad things are bad by asking about their legality or illegality. If I ask you if smoking marijuana is wrong, for instance, in some states it's legal and in some states it's illegal. You see how that's not going to help you? Also, for instance, the example I always give, lying is lying is not illegal, and yet lying is often immoral. Not going to war when you're drafted would be illegal, but for some people that's a very moral, with an M, act. It's called conscientious objectors. Right? If you're a Quaker and your religion says no violence, no war, you'll gladly break the law because you're doing something you think is moral with an M, even though it's illegal with an I. Anyways, that's a huge point. It's an easy mistake to make when talking about ethics. You go, well, what's wrong, or why is XYZ wrong? You go, well, it's because it's illegal. It's actually the other way around. Good laws make things illegal with an I when they're immoral with an I. Okay, so going on with adultery, he says, okay, what about adultery? It causes pleasure. It lets people do what they want. It gives them freedom. Those all sound like good things, but adultery is wrong. Okay, so Evodius says, he tries to say, basically the golden rule, the middle of page 7. He says, I think adultery is an evil because I myself would be unwilling to allow adultery in the case of my wife. Whoever does to another person what they do not want done to themselves does evil. But please note, Augustine says that's not a good enough way to look at morality. That's actually not what makes things wrong. The golden rule, let's put it this way, the golden rule can work as a really easy shorthand some of the time to tell you what's right and wrong. But it never really explains why things are wrong, and it just doesn't work sometimes. So in the case of adultery, I sort of love this example. This remembers the Bishop St. Augustine saying this. He says, is adultery, cheating on your spouse, wrong? Yes. Well, why is it wrong? His son Evodius tries to say, I think it's wrong because I shouldn't do things that I don't want done to me. And Augustine says, what about those couples who are fine with their spouse cheating as long as they get to cheat as well? So think of like in the 70s, they had all these swinger parties, right? Where couples would go to a party together and you would just leave with whomever's spouse you felt like. Everyone was fine with it, so no problems. And Augustine says, okay, if adultery is wrong, but everyone's fine with it in a room and there's basically just an orgy of married people, would that be not wrong or would that be more wrong? And Evodius goes, oh, that would be so wrong. And Augustine says, but see, right, the golden rule would say it's fine. It's fine to cheat if you don't mind if you're cheated on. It's fine to lie if you don't mind if you're lied to. It's fine to steal if you don't mind if you're stolen from. You see how ludicrous that would be? So another way to put it is this. I'm a big tough guy. You all know that about me. Let's say I know all these martial arts. And I like to fight because I'm just sort of a tough guy and I'm mean-spirited. So I don't mind if someone comes up and punches me, sucker punches me, because then it allows me to get into a bar brawl. Oh, and that's so much fun. I love it. Would you say that that person who doesn't mind if they get sucker punched and, a bar brawl started with, that they are allowed to, it would be moral with an M for them to walk into a bar and just start punching on people? Because they don't mind if it happened to them. No. So here already, philosophical logic showing that something we know to be wrong, punching a stranger for no reason, doesn't fit with this supposed test, the so-called golden rule of why things are wrong, shows that the golden rule is not a good gauge for your life. It's not the perfect way to tell what's right or wrong. So you see this is how philosophy works. It's not Augustine saying, hey, adultery is in the 10 Commandments, thou shalt not. It's not a matter of opinion or belief or faith. There's a logic behind why things are wrong. And that logic is not do what you're comfortable having done to you, don't do what you're uncomfortable having done to you. Think about it. The suicidal person doesn't mind if they lose their life. Does that mean they're morally allowed to go out and kill whomever they want? No. And again, that's logic speaking. That's not 10 Commandments or anything like that. So now that we've ruled out the 10 Commandments, now that we've ruled out the golden rule, we still don't really know what makes something wrong. We know it's not the golden rule. We also see below, Evodius tries again. He says, oh, things are wrong when most people condemn them. When they say, when everyone agrees, oh, adultery is wrong, what are you doing? And then Augustine goes on, you should catch the hint here. He's talking about two people who are very important to him at one and the same time. He says, look at history. Good men have been condemned to death many times. You can't go with what people think is wrong. Two big historical examples. Socrates was put to death, the philosopher Socrates was put to death by his fellow Athenians because he was asking too much philosophy questions. He was showing that people didn't know everything they pretended to know. And so people got mad and they killed him. He said they felt in their hearts that he was doing something wrong and should die for that. And so they killed him. For St. Augustine, an even more important example is Jesus. The elders in Jesus' community said, this guy is wrong, he's bad, he should die. The Roman authorities said, this guy's a pain in the ass, pardon my language, he's a pain in the rear, he's disrupting all this stuff, he deserves to die. The courts and the law insist that he should die. Remember, it's not like Jesus had a whole lot of popular support, nor did Socrates. They had a group of people who truly knew right from wrong, who supported them, and then they had the masses who condemned them as criminals. The point here is this. Once more, it's a very important point about ethics, and it's a very important justification of philosophy as the pursuit of truth, instead of just going with the flow of what other people think. Other people, even 99% of the community, can be wrong about things. They're often right, but that most people think XYZ is not itself proof for or against XYZ. The old example, everyone, quote, knew that the earth was flat. And in fact, you literally could be condemned as a criminal if you said things like the earth rotates around the sun rather than the sun rotating around the earth. Scientists died for that. So just because other people think something is true does not make it true. People make mistakes all the time. So, the end of 3, now that we've ruled out some of these other options, it's not the golden rule that makes things right or wrong. It's not the law that makes things right or wrong. And it's not the opinion of the majority that makes things right or wrong. What's left? And Augustine says, perhaps, because he hasn't proven it yet, but this is where we're going. He says, perhaps it's the desire to do wrong that makes something wrong. The person who cheats on their spouse knows that they're not supposed to cheat on their spouse. And yet they do it anyhow. That's why it's wrong. It's the intention or the will behind the act. Same thing. Think about it this way. If you murder someone, that's bad. You know it's wrong and you did it anyways, that's wrong. But if someone attacks you and you kill them in self-defense, the action is the same. Say a stabbing motion with a knife. The result is the same, dead person. But in one case, the intent was to murder, that is to do evil, and that's why it's evil. In the other one, the intent was good, to preserve your innocent life, and that's why self-defense is not evil. You see? This is what is called lust in the text, but I would prefer that we call desire to relate it to will and mental choice. It's wanting to do something knowing that it's bad that makes it bad. It's not the physical act of moving your arm with a knife in it repeatedly, because that's good in self-defense. It's not the opinion of other people. It's not the law. And it's not what you want done to yourself, which is the golden rule. Okay. So we're going pretty slowly now, but it's partly because every time I make a point, I'm trying to expand on bigger Augustine points that are important for our class. So chapter 6, eternal versus temporal law. Temporal just means in time. Okay, temporal just means in time. Human laws, the laws written by states, are what are called temporal. And what Augustine means by that is that they can be different in different places and still be good. And they can be changed over time and still be good. So probably at some point, the tax code of the U.S. was pretty good for the way the economy used to work. Okay, it used to be good. Now it's not so good and we need to change it. Not that we need to abolish taxes or anything. We just need to change and update the legal code, right? Okay, and also the tax code in the U.S. would probably justly be different than in some other country. How it might be different, let's not get into that, but let's just say the ideal tax rate in the U.S. was 20%. Totally hypothetical number. That doesn't mean it would have to be 20% in France to be a good number, right? Or 20% in Brazil or China. Maybe in Brazil it should be 13%, and in China it should be 22%. I don't know. They have different economies, right? Now, chapter 6, you're probably thinking, okay, professor, this isn't an economics class. Who cares if the tax code can justifiably be different in different countries? Who cares if the tax code of the 1930s was good for the US but is now out of date? The whole point here is this for Augustine. While some things about right and wrong vary and change, and some things about what's right and wrong are different for different people, like tax codes, some things are always the same, always good or bad, and they're good or bad for all people, whether you're French, Spanish, from the Congo, Korean, North Korean, South Korean, the same things are right or wrong. Murder is wrong in every one of those countries. Now again, it's probably illegal in all those countries too, but it's illegal. Why? Because it's wrong, not the other way around. Do you love your mom? Probably for almost all of you, the answer is yes. Even if you don't love your mom, don't you think it would be better if you loved her, or if she, acted right like a good mom and so earned your love? Whatever the problem is there, right? We all think it would be better, it would be best to have love in a familial relationship, right? Okay, the North Koreans agree. The Russians agree. Iranians agree. Canadians agree. So some things, like should you wear the red shoes today or the blue shoes today, there's no right or wrong about. Some things, like what should the tax rate be, there is a right or wrong, but it'll be different in different times and different places. For other things, should you kill someone who's innocent just because it might be fun? The answer is always no. And it's no whether you're an Iraqi, you're from Turkey, you're from Russia, wherever. That's all Augustine's trying to say here. Not that he has all of the answers, but that for some things there are settled answers and certain truths that we can rely upon. Now here you should be saying, please give me an example. Please give me an example of something certain. You said it's not the tax code and you gave murder. Okay, pretty obvious of me. What else is certain? That's exactly what we'll do next. But here we'll ask you a question. And please listen to this carefully because it's a specific question I'm asking. What things do you think are most widely agreed upon in the world? And I want you to name things that you think are basically never disagreed upon. Now, it can't be strictly never because there's always the literally insane person who says blue is up and left is green and things like that, right? But I also don't want things where it's, 52% of the population believes X, Y, Z. I want a list from you of the things that you think, in your experience, are not just what you believe, but what is most widely believed around the world. Now, for some of you, you're going to say, nothing. For some of you, the list is going to be quite long. And that'll be interesting to see. So once more, what are the things that you think are almost universally agreed upon? We're talking like 99%, 95, whatever, not 52% is my point, okay? Not 51%, but almost everyone agrees upon. And these are things that ancient people agreed upon, people in the future will agree upon, smart people, dumb people agree upon, all of this, okay? With that question, we'll end this recording. Then I'll tell you what Augustine says next.